welcome to another episode of Buckeye Shop Talk. I'm Brad Goldberg, alongside Ohio State pitching coach Dan DeLucia. We are very happy to welcome on the inventor of Baseball Think Tank, the inventor of the Core Velocity Belt, and a friend of the program, Lantz Wheeler. Lantz, thanks for coming on and joining us.
Oh, man, glad to be here. Appreciate you asking.
Talk to us kind of about what's going on, some unprecedented times. You guys hanging in there? You doing anything to stay busy with no baseball?
Man, what's crazy is that, I don't know if this is a good or a bad thing, but the Wheeler's life really hasn't changed all that much outside of just training and working with players. It's been cool. You know, one of the things I've noticed, it seems as if the social distancing, once we put those guidelines into place, it's almost as if it's brought people closer together, especially like I see more father and sons throwing baseball and doing things that I'd never seen before. I remember when I was coaching at Lipscomb one year, I kept a dozen baseballs, brand new baseballs in the back of the car. And I told my wife, I said, you know what, every time I see a kid throwing, I'm going to stop and give them a baseball. You know, by the end of the summer, I still had 12 baseballs. You know, giving one to the neighbor. Just wow. You don't see it, you know.
Wow.
So I've seen more of that. So I thought that's been interesting. Trying to find the bright side of all this.
Yeah, we're trying to stay positive in all this. So normally we kind of start with, I guess, chronological order. Can you kind of tell us about your playing career and how that kind of rolled over into coaching a little bit?
Yeah. I started off in junior college. I'm from Kentucky originally, Elizabethtown, just outside of Louisville, and went to Central Hardin, played 2 years at Paducah Community College, and then from there I went to Morehead State and wasn't the best pitcher. I'll be the first to tell you that. I ended up having – well, at the time, there was no diagnosis for it, but just my ulnar nerve of my elbow crossed over so it would swell. And so I left, got done with baseball there, and actually was a single dad for a couple of years and got a job to coach volunteer high school with my best friend, Todd Thompson, at Central Hardin High School, who's done a phenomenal job over the last 20 years. And then I took a job as Luther Bramlett's assistant at St. Catherine. It was me and my oldest daughter now. We were dorm directors, so we lived in a 12-by-12 dorm for a year together, stayed there for 2, and then took the volunteer job at Lipscomb, was there for 4 years, then on to Louisiana Monroe for my final 2 years before moving back to Nashville and working with a buddy of mine, Hunter Bledsoe, who's got Bledsoe Sports Agency and has got some big-time dudes. So I've been fortunate to be around some really good people, and that's really my story with the coaching.
That's awesome. Good stuff. Dan, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, so obviously the good stuff, right? The Core Velocity Belt is obviously what you're known best for, and the Lantz Wheeler name has become very popular around the baseball world. So maybe talk, and I know the story already, and Brad probably does as well, but the story of like how you came about the Core Velocity Belt. Obviously, it's what you kind of alluded to earlier, dealing with your kids and watching them. But then also the willingness to fail. I've heard you talk about when going through the product, there's been so many different versions and just the adjustments you've had to make kind of going through the process of that.
Yeah, it actually took me 10 years, but I want to get this straight out. Like during the time, I can remember working with players, and it was real because we have a hard time. I think a big problem that we run into is that we make the mistake. We believe that we can communicate coordination. That's not actually possible because our natural tendency is to think in terms of movement. So I was doing a lesson where I would do private lessons at Lipscomb. And so I would pick up my daughter at school, and then we would go to the basketball gym during the winter, and I would do lessons. And we've always got that one kid that every time you turn around, they're into something. That was mine. And she actually took an old J-band, and she had wrapped it around her waist, and she had taken her shoes off where she just had her socks on. So as she would start to back up from the wall, she would just sit down. It would just scoot her. I'm like, well, goodness gracious, it's perfect. It's a great babysitter. So for about 20 minutes, she was doing that, man. And I can still see this right now. And I'm looking out the corner of my eye, and I can see it in slow motion. And her heels had came up off the ground, and when she did, it pulled her up, and she just slams directly into the concrete wall. And I'm thinking, holy crap, this kid is dead. I'm going to replace her teeth. Halfway down there, I'm thinking, this would be perfect for pitchers. So I canceled the lesson. We went out to Walmart, got a back support brace, brought it home, man. He's like, what in the heck am I going to do with this thing? So we got an old industrial sewing machine off of eBay, and it looked like Cinderella, man. There were times I would come in, there were literally smoke coming to where it couldn't actually sew it. It was just too big of a job. So it took us all in all about 10 years to do it and do it right. And that's just kind of how it was born. It was completely by accident.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, that's funny. I love hearing that story because I feel like some of the best stuff out there it comes by accident. But obviously, you know, you have the product. You've done a great job with implementing it through its various trials, right? And now to a product that some of the best in the game and in the world use consistently. And some of the other talks we've had of big leaguers, you know, I've even gone into how they actually use it. So, so I guess what are some of the common misperception or misconceptions or flaws in pitching mechanics that you see? You still work with a lot of guys, you know, various age ranges. So what are some of the misconceptions that you see that you're able to help with the core velocity belt?
That's a great question. I think the first part is that we understand we undervalue the importance of body awareness too often, especially with what we see today. It's all about the legs, it's all about the arm, but we don't place the value on the hips and just being aware of how to move the hips. Like an example I always use is that my youngest one, Remy, we're at the playground one day and she's like, she's got her hand up. She's like, well, I've got to go tell my 3 friends bye. I said, how many you got? She goes, 1. And she had to pull down her fingers in order to tell me, because you got to think at this point in her life, she had only used her hand to grasp objects. So how her brain looked at it, it was just one body part. So I think a lot of times with players, with our lifestyle, with our culture, with their intention of trying to use the legs and quads, we get very quad dominant. So how the brain looks at the body, it looks at those glutes and the hips and the quads as one piece. So they have a really hard time separating the two. And when you really think about like how I look at the hips or the center mass, it's like a fuse box. And no matter how much force I can put into the ground, if I'm transferring that energy up the chain and it either blows there or it has a weak ability to transfer the energy, then you're only going to be as efficient or transfer as much energy as your least efficient part. And I think more so than anything, it's the lack of body awareness and how to separate that part of the body from the rest. Another one is just the idea of hip-shoulder separation. Like you think like efficient movement is thoughtless, it's mindless. And if we're actually having to think about delaying our shoulders or doing something, then that answers our question. We're not being very efficient. So those are some of the big things, because once I've seen guys just get more aware of their body, because every movement's going to originate right there in the pelvis and the hips, and it's going to go down to the ground and back up. Once they're more aware of it, I think a lot of it just fixes itself.
A lot of good nuggets in there. I want to talk to you about a couple things. So for some of our listeners or viewers who haven't heard of Pitch-A-Palooza, Lantz puts on this awesome event in Nashville. Do you call it a convention or kind of a conference for pitching, all things pitching?
It's just more of a meeting. It's just more like a weekend get together.
Yeah.
Good. And it's gotten a lot bigger, and I got to go to my first one this year. I've kind of watched from afar, but now that I'm done playing, I got to go, and Dan's been to a couple now. One thing that I really liked in your presentation is you were open as anyone talking about how you've changed your mindset in the way that you've taught pitching and you've taught movement through your learnings over the years. Was there a certain time or a certain thing that happened or a certain pitcher you work with where you went, oh crap, maybe the stuff I was doing previous to, let's say now, or that time that it happened wasn't right? How did you go about kind of swallowing your pride or going into, hey, I might have been wrong here, to now where you are now as kind of a preeminent guy where people, you know, obviously want to interview you and buy your product?
That's a great question. I think the first thing in any type of player development, and I think this is the problem we have, I think the first step is just building relationships. Because we can take all the data we want, we can put this together, but unless you have a history of the player, unless you have that relationship with the player, it's really for nothing, because I think too often we undervalue the importance of communication. We want to go straight to coordination and then in hopes and trying to synchronize and optimize it on the field. But unless you have an understanding of the player, you have some buy-in there, because unless you show belief in the player, there's not going to be buy-in. So that had been my strategy all along, was first just to be able to connect with the player. So it was pretty easy for me to say, hey man, I've screwed this whole thing up. Another big one was, I can remember working with a player, and we went through all the drills, and man, he was really good. But as soon as he would get on the mound after about 45 minutes of doing this, he would still finish, his hips wouldn't turn. It was almost like he was trying to finish in fielding position. So I'm like, of course, hey, let's go back. Let's do some more drills. So we go back for more drills, and this has been about an hour and 10 minutes. And finally, I'm at a loss. I'm like, man, we've done all the drills. It's still not working. So I wised up, and I said, man, are you trying to finish in fielding position? Yeah, that's what I thought I was supposed to do. Just by getting his interpretation or perception of what the movement was supposed to be, changed everything. And I think that's a big one, is that information is outstanding. We all know that. But what we undervalue is the communication, how you communicate, how you demonstrate. All of these serve as the mental picture he's got into his mind that we're actually analyzing as video on the screen. But that's where it starts. So unless you have that understanding of how he sees it, we're always going to be, there's going to be a separation there.
I think that's awesome. And your presentation, the one thing that I took away was again, like the humility, even in that, and you're able to, obviously baseball is known as a game of failure, right? And you showed the humility, and it was almost like empathizing with some of these players who are failing at something and they're trying to figure it out, right? So you almost, from that connection level, got down to their level from the failure standpoint, we're able to connect with them. I thought the presentation, that humility piece was awesome, because you were in front of, thousands of baseball guys and presenting something, but showing them like, hey man, I was teaching it wrong, essentially, as of 5 years ago. And yeah. I think that was awesome, because not only that, but then you showed obviously, the evolution of just learning, right, and getting better at things. So I think that was great.
I think with players, a lot of times we make the mistake of assuming that they're afraid to fail. But man, the more I've thought about that, I don't think that's necessarily the case, because when you watch the little ones, I mean, how we've learned to walk, how we've learned to ride bikes, how we've learned to do everything, it's just a system of failure. So it's not so much failure. It's the idea of being criticized for failing that prevents them from doing so much, because unless you provide that feel good, they're just not going to do it anyway, because we tend to do things that we believe we're good at. Because we're good at it, we feel good about it. Because we feel good about it, we do it more. Because we do it more, we're better at what we do. So I think that's really where it starts, is creating that system of feel good and eliminating the criticism and saying, hey man, it's cool to fail. It's not failing. But that's what I think more players fear than anything, is just being criticized for failing.
Mm-hmm. Man, great insight right there. And again, we've had some of the best, even on these interviews that have come on and said they would not be where they are now had they not gone through experiences of failure. And it's like, if you look at a lot of the best CEOs out there and presidents and whatnot, that's exactly what had to happen, is they had to fail. It's almost necessary for the success you're looking for.
I would absolutely agree with that. Yeah. But if you're thinking about it, if you're in a situation where you're never failing, like, how many chances are you taking? How many times are you actually reaching outside the boundaries of your comfort zone? And we all know that's where growth happens, is once we start to expand the outer circumference of our comfort zone.
Right. I think that's great perspective for a lot of young aspiring players that are either high school players going into college or going into pro ball, and always been the best at something. And at some point, that humility, right, that humble pie is going to hit them in the face. Not necessarily, but like you said, they shouldn't take it as a bad thing. They should embrace it, know that it's part of my process.
100%.
That's awesome. Cool.
No, I love that. Another question about Pitch-A-Palooza. So this year there was a very large contingent of MLB teams, organization, analytics departments, you name it. Can you talk about the progression, maybe in the change or the shift of the audience where you started and the people that first showed up, whether it's high school, college, just baseball fans, and how that how unique the conglomeration of people there was, because I thought it was so cool to see MLB execs and MLB pitching coaches just chatting it up with a high school coach, a local high school coach, and not really have any egos involved. Can you kind of talk about the unique environment?
That's my favorite part of it, and that's why we eliminate one of the rules there. You're not allowed to refer to yourself as coach unless that's listed on your birth certificate, because we kind of want to break down those barriers. Because we're all the same, regardless of what we've done or what we've accomplished. We're all there for the same reason. And it started, I can remember, like, each year after college baseball, what I would do, I would go around and I would try to speak with other guys that had a really good season, just to pick their brain, learn from those guys. And so after I got out of baseball, college baseball in 2012, it was 2013 was the first year. And I can remember it was around September, and I'm like, you know what? I really miss competing and the relationships and being in the clubhouse. And I said, I'm just going to call some of these guys and see if they'd be willing just to come down in Nashville and do this. So the very first Palooza, I think we had 8 presenters. There were 49 people there. Last year, we had close, I think, to around to 800, maybe a little bit more. And just through it all, man, it was the MLB started to take off probably 3 or 4 years ago. But it's funny how baseball works, especially at the Major League Baseball level, is that once they hear that somebody else is coming and they want to be there, I always compared it to like middle school. Once they found out the girls like the one boy, they all like the boy. So it's more the fear of losing out versus gain. But then I think once a few attended, they realized, the information there, that it started driving more and more there. But yeah, my favorite part of the whole thing are the discussions outside the actual presenters, because that goes on for hours. There's been times that I would get done and I would start to leave. It's 1 o'clock in the morning, and they're still out there going till 2, 3, 4 a.m. and then getting back up and starting it again at 8 o'clock. So that's my favorite part about it, is the relationships and the conversations that's going on in the hallways.
That's what Goldie and I, we went over to the hot stove afterward. What is that, Saturday night? And we said, okay, we're going to say hi to a couple specific people we wanted to say hi to. Same thing. We're there till 1 in the morning? Something like that. Just continuing baseball conversation. So I know
that DJ and those guys didn't leave the hot stove, I think, until 5 o'clock that morning. Yeah.
That's unbelievable. You're right.
The power of Alan Yeager.
Right,
he's the best, isn't he?
Yeah, he's awesome. So I had a question. So did you have more on the Pitch-A-Palooza, Goldie?
I kind of have a question that's relating to it. Let's go to it. You have a very unique perspective on all the people that show up there and the relationships you have with probably a pretty good majority of it. We're seeing a lot more pro teams being open to hiring amateur coaches, whether it's college, high school, the private sector. And I want to get your opinion on why you think they're a little bit more open to it now, kind of piggybacking off of what you just said and seeing the progression of actual Pitch-A-Palooza. Is it that they've kind of been a little bit more open-minded? Is it the analytics department? I'd love to hear what you have to say about it.
I think the biggest thing they've realized is that the forward-thinking machine is found in college baseball. It's not pro baseball. It's you guys. You guys are the innovators. You guys are the ones that's getting everything started. I think pro baseball's been behind college baseball for several years, and they're just now becoming aware of that, and they're trying to pick up and involve a lot of the concepts and training that you see that's common inside college baseball, but very rare in pro baseball. And I'll often compare DJ to kind of like the Jackie Robinson of college baseball coaches. He was the first to make that jump, and with his success, I think it laid the framework for others to follow. But yeah, it all starts, this whole thing in training and the cutting edge, it starts in college baseball.
I agree. That's good insight. So I kind of want to take we talked a little bit about communication, right? And you mentioned when you were first working with, I guess when your transition on pitching mechanics kind of started to transition, you were working with a guy, and communication was a big part of that. And you alluded to it earlier, but the concept of feel, Right. So can you explain that, I guess, in your own words, the concept of feel and body control that you alluded to earlier, and why that's so important, especially when using the velo belt?
Yeah. Well, first of all, there's feel is, you think about it, that's the body's native language. That's how we respond to everything. There's feelings, with if I'm mad, obviously it's reflected in my body language. So they're all integrated in the same part of the brain. There's the actual physical touch, the sensation, and then there's the perception of it. Meaning, like a good example of this is like Rex. We were fishing one day, and so he'd always fish in a pond. He'd never fish in the Pacific Ocean. So as soon as he throws the line out, he associates a tight line with the fish being on it, because in the calm pond, as soon as the line tightens, you've got a fish. So he was getting aggravated because as soon as he would throw his hook out there, his line would tighten, but there was no fish. On the other side of us was this old man, and he's just catching fish after fish. So the thing is that even though they had the same feedback, the tight line, his feel or his perception or association for the difference between the ocean current and the fish, he could tell the difference where Rex couldn't. So a lot of that is just experience. And so that's the thing that you're going to see with your elite players versus your non-elite is it's the same sensory feedback. It's the same sensation, but their perception of what's actually happening is much higher. So when you look at like a pitcher and you start to think about it, think about like a marionette puppet that's got thousands of strings on it. If I just handed you a puppet, Goldie or Dan, I said, here, control this puppet, make it dance. You'd be like, no way, I can't do this. The first thing you'd have to do, you'd have to label your strings and say, hey, this controls the right foot. This controls the left foot. Now I can go right, left. I can start to coordinate the movements. But if your strings weren't labeled, which is proprioception or another sense of feel, then it's just not ever going to happen. And then the other aspect of feel is we use it kind of as an acronym. It's what are you trying to do? Focus, explore different ways of how to do it, eliminate what didn't work, and then create the learned association in your own words.
Awesome.
That's good stuff right there. We kind of going off of what you were talking about with experience, we'll talk to a lot of freshmen or first year guys in the program, and they'll get done with their first game of the fall or even their first real game against team A, B, or C in a real setting, in a real stadium, and we'll tell them, hey man, like, you don't think that Dan and I and all these coaches that are around didn't have that same experience? Like, everyone knows how you're feeling right now. It's okay to fail. We want you to fail, because in 3 weeks, in 3 months, in 3 years, when you're a junior, you'll be laughing at how you feel right now. Yeah. And that's all part of the feel and the experience. And hopefully you can tell that to a freshman. We don't have to, but I think that's kind of a good way of relating it. It's, we understand that you're going to come out maybe a little bit hot and not be as calm as you'd want to be, because it's a new experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I saw a quote one time. It's one of my favorites. It said, experience is the toughest teacher because you never get the results until after you've already taken the test. I know, that's pretty good.
Really
awesome.
Good.
Love that. Right.
Cool. You got anything else, Dan? This has been great. We really appreciate it.
Yeah. So maybe give a little heads up, and maybe I don't know if I'm assuming you've thought of this a little bit, but what to expect, how to make Pitch-A-Palooza better, because I've been there the last 2 years, and just from one year to the next, significantly better. And again, the best part was just getting to see and meet so many new people. But anything on the horizon that people could be expecting?
That's a great question. That's something I try to think about each year. One of my favorite things is I try to go outside the sport of baseball. So much of what I've learned and what I implement on a daily basis wasn't found in a pitching book or on a website. It was found, like one example is just teaching myself how to skateboard, because I wanted a way to connect with my kids. And then I'd always notice that some of my higher velocity players or pitchers, they'd grown up with a skateboarding or a surfing background. So I wanted to dig into that a little bit more. So as I started that, I just submerged myself in that motor learning experience, and it was crazy how much it taught me about the power of belief. I was pretty good in the apartment, but once I got out there in Venice Beach with those professionals, I didn't believe I was very good, so therefore the skill diminished, because I didn't want to be the old guy giving the thumbs up as he's gurneyed off from the skate park. I noticed that anytime my visual background would change from the apartment to the real world, the skills started to diminish. So I'm like, wow, this is a lot of what's going on. And then at the same time, something I knew nothing about, was it still possible to teach myself how to do this? What was required? So I started to dig into a lot of the skateboarding, man, and the cultures at those skate parks you're talking about. Awesome. If just more baseball could follow that, it's self-autonomy. They really reward failure. They reward the risk of trying it until pretty soon the risk becomes a reward for that group of people, which is really cool. So one of my favorite guys, if you got a chance, check him out, man, is Rodney Mullen. It's that dude, as far as motor learning goes, is freaking genius, and he's a professional skater. He's kind of like the Godfather. He's kind of like Paul Nyman of pitching mechanics.
Yeah.
But he would be a guy I would definitely like to have. But something with a little bit more range is where I'd like to go on how can we take the world of skateboarding and apply some of those principles into baseball? How can we take other aspects or elements of a different skill and apply those in the same context?
Love it. I love that concept. There's a book out there called Range.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't know if you've read it or not, but it's a great, gives great perspective. It starts talking about Tiger versus Roger Federer in the sports world, but then it expands out to the differences between more generalists, people like being good at different areas versus the people that are trying to specialize in one specific area. I think that's great insight. That's really good insight. So
I lied, Lance. I have another question.
Yeah.
A comment first, going off of kind of outside the box and non-baseball presenters, and this is kind of has to do with baseball, but the presentation that blew me away at this year's Pitch-A-Palooza was Dr. Greg Rose with On Base U and TPI. And when his presentation ended, I was like, no, I need more of this. And we got to go chat with him, and really nice guy, and showed us some of the things that are down the pipeline for them. Do you have a presenter or a presentation in the duration of all the Pitch-A-Palooza that kind of sticks out to you as one that maybe shifted the culture or really sticks out to you in general?
Yeah, that's a good one. That would be Dr. Seals, Alan Seals' 2015 presentation probably ranks. And that's hard to say because, man, Robichaux and so many Paul Nyman, there's been so many good ones, but one that really stood out to me, it was like, wow, I thought I knew, but now I understand a little bit more, was Dr. Alan Seals. He's the director of neurosurgery at Vanderbilt. He's Roger Goodell's chief medical officer. But when he started explaining how really it's not about the body, it's about the brain. That's where pitching mechanics start, is at the brain. I think too often we focus on the muscular system. It's almost as if we're coaching players like they're headless horsemen. And we're saying, hey, just keep your head in the bag. We'll just mold the body through muscle memory or whatever it might be. And I think that's kind of led people down the wrong way. And he was the one that said, hey, everything matters. It all starts with the brain. And one of the things that stood out at me was like, he was explaining why, you see hitters that hit in BP, and you see so many pitchers that will go into a bullpen, they're lights out. But then as soon as they step on the mound, you're like, man, why can't this guy perform? Why doesn't he do it? You don't see that as much with hitters. So he was explaining the concept that in BP, it's a very visually loud background. There's people bringing balls in, there's screens being moved. You never see the hitter's eye basically because you're constantly moving, all this stuff's coming at you. And so, but as a pitcher, what do? We say, hey, you want to go throw a bullpen? So it's just you and the catcher back there. There's no umpire, there's no hitter, but more importantly, there's no fans moving around. So what a hitter does is he takes that visually loud background, he goes to a game, and now it's just him and the pitcher in the hitter's eye. So he has submerged that task in anxiety and distraction. So it makes it easier for him to perform versus a pitcher who's training in a very loud or a very quiet background. There's not much going on. But then when he goes and performs, there's stuff moving everywhere. So that was a big one. And it reminded me of a story that I read. It was about Serena Williams, and her father was talking about one of the first lessons that he taught his daughters was how to hit the ground when they heard a drive-by shooting. So think about that. So they're learning in their practice how to hit the ground on a drive-by shooting, but then they're competing in Wimbledon with the class and the politeness, and you're talking about two different environments. So I always tell our guys, train in Compton, play in Wimbledon. And so that's really where I got that from, was Alan Seals. But going back to that is that pitchers go to a very quiet background, just you and the catcher. As they step onto the mound, now they've got a hitter, now they've got an umpire, but it's the distraction of people moving in the background that the brain's processing all this information. So a lot of times that shows up as anxiety because it's not sure what to do with it. So one of the things that we started to do was with the pro guys in the off season is that we would call the field director and we would get videos from the center field view, and then we would play that in the background while they were throwing their pins at their loudest places, at the craziest places. So we would just go through, one bullpen would be at Fenway, the next would be at New York, the next one would be at wherever you want it to be. But that was kind of the stuff that I'd gotten from Dr. Seals. But he's a brilliant guy, and he's got a way of really making complex information simple, which is what I really appreciated.
I can vividly remember that one. I want to say it was the first one, maybe the first speaker of that one. I literally am looking at my notes that I wrote down, and I think the term was dynamic fixation training.
You're good.
Was what you're talking about. I know. I remember he went into sleep, the power of sleep as well. So couldn't agree more. I thought he was an unbelievable speaker and a presenter, and gave really, really useful information. Outside the box type stuff that baseball guys don't necessarily, think about. So
no, that's exactly right.
Yep. So,
I love that.
You got anything else, Goldie?
No, I just want to make a comment on that. I wasn't even there, and you were, and we both kind of had this idea when we started together. Was we call them chaos pens, Lance, where essentially we kind of started the idea of every pen had noise. Dan got a pretty big subwoofer, and we connected to Bluetooth.
That's awesome.
And we let them pick the music, and then slowly but surely, we had one guy asked to change the music, and Dan goes, "No, you're going to listen to this because you're not going to get to choose the walk-up songs against it." And then we kind of ramped it up as the fall went on. We had just the pitching staff lining up against the fence, which is closest to our bullpen in left field. And the coolest thing about it was maybe our best chaos pen outside was all the hitters were doing BP in their prep and their prehab, and they all sprint over at this pitcher. And you kind of you could see his brain moving, going, "Uh-oh, this is not normal. I got to adjust." And he got through it, and he did well. And it's turned into pretty much darn near every pen. We have loud music going, and we're in the cold for some of it, so it gets really loud indoors when we have to go indoors. So it's been something that kind of ingrained in our culture. It's pretty cool.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm. You got anything else, Dan?
I don't, man. This has been awesome. Really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, well, Dan, Goldie, I appreciate you guys having me, man.
Yeah, this is great to talk baseball, and we appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, and everybody out there who doesn't have a core velocity belt definitely need to, because I'm serious when I say that. It revolutionizes, the way you do conceptualize how your body moves, right? And it does increase that feel or that proprioception. So I would encourage anybody that's listening to it, at least test it out, give it a try. Because it's very, very useful, and it's been a big impact in our program.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's true.
Cool.
It's on everyone's individual development plans every day, damn near. So in some different modality of it.
Right.
It's true.
Awesome. That's awesome. I'd love to pick your brains on how you guys are using it too one day.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's do it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So
thanks again.
all right, Lance.
All right,
Appreciate
thanks,
it, man. Yep. We'll talk soon.